Everybody loves a show. Stagestruck. The audience loves to laugh. The audience loves to cry. Anything that's good can go. The clown with his pants falling down, or the dance, that's the dream of romance, or the scene where the villain is made. That's entertainment.
Stagestruck, the full hour devoted to the transcribing of the magic world and people of the stage. Tonight, Stagestruck brings you the story of the most fabulous producer of them all, the glorifier of the American girl, Florenz Ziegfeld, told by the stars and artists who knew and worked with him. You'll hear Eddie Cantor, Billie Burke, Sophie Tucker, Charles Winninger, Ruby Keeler, Ole Olsen, Gladys Feldman, Gene Buck, and Gus Van. Listen as the glamorous past comes alive in the wonderful performances of Will Rogers, Helen Morgan, Gallagher and Shean, John Steele, Bert Williams, Ruth Etting, Jimmy Durante, and Eddie Cantor. And you'll hear the voice of the master showman himself, Florenz Ziegfeld. It's all about theater, the people who make it, the people who love it, the people who live it.
The world is the stage is the world of entertainment.
And now, here's your host, Mike Wallace. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Stagestruck. A pretty girl is like a melody. And the man who glorified her was Florenz Ziegfeld. He was born 85 years ago today, and his amazing career as the leading producer of musical shows, begun back in 1907, included 21 of his famous follies, often imitated, never equaled. His cabaret shows, a new thing then on the Amsterdam theater roof, such as Ziegfeld's 9 o'clock reviews and midnight frolics, and other wonderful Broadway shows, Rio Rita, Sally, Rosalie, Sunny, Hot Chow, Whoopee, and Showboat. The musical comedy in America was in sad shape when Ziegfeld came to Broadway. One critic, speaking of a current attraction, said of the ingenue who wore a diamond necklace, it looked like a lantern on a wreck. Ziegfeld set out to change all that, and he set his sights only on superlatives, the most beautiful girls, the best comics, the best designers, and the finest music obtainable. One of the men closest to Ziegfeld was Gene Buck, for many years his lyric writer and assistant producer. Mr. Buck is a former president of ASCAP, the American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers. He still attends meetings, and we caught him after a recent one to talk about his old boss.
In my estimation, Ziegfeld was really the father of the American Review. I considered that there were three great showmen produced by America up to Ziegfeld's time. One was Barnum with the Circus, Tex Rickard with the Prize Fight, and Ziegfeld in the theater.
Mr. Buck, what was the first show you did for Ziegfeld?
Well, I happened to be an artist, drawing title pages for sheet music. I started writing songs, and I wrote a number called Daddy Has a Sweetheart and Mother Is Her Name. In looking over the American scene, I considered Mr. Ziegfeld the greatest producer in America, and I picked on him. I presented to Ziegfeld with the song, the stage setting, and he sent for Julian Mitchell, who was one of the greatest stage directors that ever lived, who was staging the Follies at that time. And Mitchell immediately saw the possibilities and said, all right, we'll take this number. That was my start with him, and the song became a big hit.
How'd you get started with him?
I wrote for Ziegfeld for 16 years. I did 16 Follies and 28 editions of Midnight Frolics on the roof, the Amsterdam roof. Did numerous songs. Tulip Time, Garden of My Dreams, Sally Come Back to the Alley, Neath the South Sea Moon, Hello Frisco.
Who were some of the composers that you collaborated with for Ziegfeld?
It was my good fortune and privilege to have written with the late, great Victor Herbert, Unforgettable Memory, Louis Hirsch, Dave Stamper, James Hanley, Rudolph Rimmel, and others.
And I guess that his comics were as great as his composers.
I'd like to say today, they barely show on one comic. And from the attic of my memory, just to name these comedians in one show for the Follies that I'd have to try to dig up jokes for and try to fit into an evening's entertainment. Bert Williams, Bill Rogers, Eddie Cantor, William C. Fields, Leon Arrow, Ed Wynn, Andrew Toombs. They were all in one show. And that went on year after year, these comedians, with the Ziegfeld organization.
How did Will Rogers come to the Follies?
He was playing in vaudeville with the Ropin Act, and I saw in Rogers an earthy quality that was not represented in the American theater. We started him in the Midnight Frolic. Rogers walked down there with his clothesline, which I called his roping. And when he'd miss a rope trick, he would tell a gag. The same every night. Well, frequently the same people would come to the Midnight Frolic, and they didn't want to hear that same joke. So when I went back to Rogers, and he said, Gene, I have an idea. Let me try something. Incidentally, Ziegfeld had told me to let him go. He said, cowpunchers getting stale up there. So I said, what do you want to do? He said, well, I want to tell some gags, and I can get gags out of the paper. That was the start of Will Rogers in bouncing off of events that were happening. And I wish there was a personality gracing the American scene today that had that ability.
Did all phases of a production, a Ziegfeld production, get as much attention as, say, the comics and the girls?
I don't believe he ever stinted with money, ability, or brains by way of talent, beauty, scenery, costumes. And I cannot mention Ziegfeld without bringing up the name of a man who revolutionized scenery in the United States named Joseph Urban, a Viennese painter who did the sets and the scenery for the Follies. The Follies were started in 1907. And in 1915, this great painter, an architect, brought his gifts and talents to the Follies. And from then on till the day he died, he did all of Ziegfeld's productions. Ziegfeld couldn't produce a show without him.
Mr. Buck, of all the songs to which you set lyrics for Ziegfeld, what's your favorite?
Hello Fresco, perhaps Tulip Time, with a young fella I'd picked up in a YMCA tent during the war named John Steele, who sang it. And afterwards, my good friend Irving Berlin wrote for him this same Steele, one of the great songs in American folklore called The Pretty Girl's Like a Melody.
It was the Follies of 1919. Many say it was Ziegfeld's greatest show. When he asked Irving Berlin for just one more song, to bring the girls on, he said. And Berlin said he was written out. But Ziegfeld insisted, just one more song. And so after a time, Irving Berlin returned with a song that became Ziegfeld's theme song for all time. Here's tenor John Steele singing as he did that opening night so long ago. His voice and the music showing the quality of the recordings back in those days. The unforgettable A Pretty Girl is Like a Melody.
A pretty girl is like a melody that haunts you night and day, just like the strain of a haunting refrain. She'll start upon a marathon and run around your brain. You can't escape. She's in your memory by morning, night, and noon. She will leave you and then come back again. A pretty girl is just like a pretty June.
John Steele was a romantic soloist. But some of the most famous Follies singing came from a twosome by the name of Gus Vann and Joe Skank. Joe's dead now. But Gus is working in a nightclub down in Miami Beach. And we went to talk to him about the old days. Gus, when you and your partner, Joe Skink, went into the Follies back in 1919, was that your big break in show business, or were you already pretty well-established performers?
Well, to tell you the truth, anybody that had a chance to get into the Ziegfeld Follies were really getting a break, but we were in show business about 9 years before that, and, that was our big break, getting into the Follies.
What was your big number in that show?
We introduced a song called Mandy. It was one of the most beautiful numbers I think I ever saw in any musical show. It happened to be a minstrel number with all the entire cast, Bert Williams, Eddie Cantor, Fanny Bryce, Marilyn Miller, John Steele. It had a fabulous cast, and they were all dressed in pink silk costumes, minstrel costumes, and we'd sing a chorus of the song, and then Marilyn Miller would make her entrance coming down this, looked like she was coming out of heaven, this beautiful pink setting, walk down these stairs, and she'd join in. The second chorus, she'd do what we called those days soft shoe dance.
Uh-huh. Gus, could you give us an idea of how you and your partner, Van and Skink, sang the number?
I'll sing a verse and a chorus the way we both sang it.
Fine.
I was strolling down one evening by the silvery moon. I could hear somebody singing a familiar tune. So I stopped a while to listen. Not a word I wanted to miss. It was just somebody serenading, something like this. Oh, come on, Mandy, there's a minister handy, and it sure would be dandy if we let him make a fee. So don't you linger, here's the ring for your finger. Isn't it a humdinger? Come along and let the wedding chimes bring happy times for Mandy and me.
Susan B. Anthony got the vote for the girls. Flo Ziegfeld glorified them and got the votes of all the men. The highest paid showgirl of her time was Gladys Feldman. She's now Gladys Feldman Braham, and she's president of the Ziegfeld Girls Club, the organization that takes care of any girl who worked for Ziegfeld who's now down on her luck. She interrupted her work on the club's 18th annual dance at the Waldorf Astoria this coming April 24th to remember the days when florists didn't have the only American beauties. There was also a man named Flo. You were one of Florenz Ziegfeld's special girls, so-called. There were 6 of them.
That's right. Marion Davies, Justine Johnson, Olive Thomas, Hazel Lewis, Tuck Qualters, and myself.
And Gladys Feldman.
That's right.
Now, what were the duties of the special girls that made them distinct and apart from the rest of the beautiful group?
Well, I really don't know, but Mr. Ziegfeld picked out these 6 girls, and we had all sorts of special favors and special numbers to do.
Oh, I see. You were Florenz Ziegfeld's highest-paid showgirl, too.
That's right. I had a contract when I first joined the Follies. Ziegfeld gave me a contract at $100 a week for 5 years,
now,
which at that time was a lot of
money. Florenz Ziegfeld is known as the perfectionist of all time in show business.
No doubt about that. If there was a number in the Follies that had to have real furs, we had real furs. There were no imitations. And when they'd bring over material to show him, and it was $35 or $50 a yard, he'd say, "Oh, that isn't good enough. I want something better." He was really a fabulous man.
Did he interfere with your private life at all?
Well, he never allowed any of his girls to use makeup on the street, and he was very jealous of their reputation. He didn't want any of his girls to drink, and of course, in those days, very few of them smoked.
Were these the days of the stage door, Johnny?
That's right. The Follies was at the New Amsterdam Theater on 42nd Street, and at 41st Street, the entire street was lined with Rolls Royces, and if it doesn't sound too conceited, on opening night, I used to receive so many flowers that I'd have to have about a half a dozen taxis, take my flowers back home.
How long did you work for him?
I was with him for 5 years until David Belasco took Ina Claire, Lillian Tashman, and myself and put us on the legitimate stage. It was very funny about Ziegfeld. You know, he never allowed his girls on the stage to be bare-legged or anything like that. He always felt that tights or chiffon or something like that was much more enticing, and I quite agree with him.
What sort of a person was he to work with?
He was very easy to work for if you did a good job. If you laid down on the job in any way, shape, or form, or if you were a bit fresh or something like that, then he was very severe. But if you cooperated with him in every way and showed him that you tried to do everything you could possibly do, he was wonderful to work for. Just wonderful.
In New York, Gladys Feldman said Ziegfeld was wonderful to work for. 3,000 miles away out in Hollywood, one of the most delightful dancers the musical stage ever knew. She was in such Ziegfeld shows as Showgirl back in 1929. Ruby Keeler had this to say.
Mr. Ziegfeld was wonderful to work for. Just wonderful. He's, to me, of course, there is only one Ziegfeld, and there will only be one Ziegfeld. I think he watched each and every performance, and if you happened to give a good show, he would send a little note back and say, "Good show today, Ruby." And he would send presents back, and it was, you were always out there trying to do the best you could for him.
Ziegfeld had them all. Showgirls like Gladys Feldman and Mae Murray, dancers like Ruby Keeler. And in 1928, his great hit Whoopee had the leading blues singer of the day, Ruth Etting, who set a style for singers all over the country. She was with Ziegfeld to his last follies. But here she is, back in 1928, singing her hit song from Whoopee, Love Me or Leave Me.
Love me or leave me, let me be lonely. You won't believe me, and I love you only. I'd rather be lonely than happy with somebody else. You might find the nighttime the right time for kissing, but nighttime is my time for just reminiscing, regretting instead of forgetting with somebody else. There'll be no one unless that someone is you. I intend to be independently blue, oh, so blue. I want a love that I don't want to borrow, to have it today, to give back tomorrow, or I couldn't bear it, to share it with somebody else.
The Follies of 1922 saw two of the maddest maniacs in show business tearing up the premises for the first time under the banner of Ziegfeld, Ole Olsen and Chick Johnson. Chick's in Europe now, so things were reasonably sane when we talked with Ole out in Hollywood and asked him about their start, Olsen and Johnson's start in show business.
Well, Mike, you know, it's been our great privilege to have been a part of show business since way back in 1914. In those days, when we were fresh and young and eager, Ziegfeld was a magic name. It was brilliant with theatrical luster. Our thrill was one night when we got a telegram at the old Riverside Theater in New York, East Riverside Theater, and asking us to call Mr. Ned Wayburn at the Ziegfeld office the following day. We stayed up all night in order to be sure that we called him, and the following day we asked Olsen and Johnson to go on the midnight roof of Ziegfeld, not the Follies, but the roof. And we were real thrilled, and I recall very vividly that he took us down to that little bar behind the theater, and marvelous Bert Williams was there, and he always stood at the end of the bar. He never mingled. If you wanted to say hello, you went to Bert. And he took us down, and he says, "Bert, this is Olsen and Johnson, two live youngsters from the West." And he says, "I've offered a guarantee of 10 weeks on the roof at $400. And Bert was drinking his little favorite drink of gin, and He looked at Chick and I rather patronizingly, and he says, and they're hesitating? I'll never forget it.
One of the most beloved characters and best-loved actors in show business came into the public eye when Showboat opened in 1927, commanded by Charles Winninger as Captain Andy. Charles Winninger later went out to Hollywood, where he's continuing a successful career in films. But as he reminisced when we visited with him in California, sailing under Ziegfeld wasn't always smooth, at least not before Showboat.
I was very proud to be one of the members of the 1920 and 21 Follies. In the cast, we have Fanny Bryce, Bernard Granville, Jack Donahue, Mary Eaton, Carl Randall, Moran and Mack, Van and Skenk, John Steele, Delisle Alda, Ray Dooley, and yours truly. While in Boston, there was quite a bit of trimming going on, and in trimming the show, he discharged me without notice. I was getting a fairly good salary, about $6.50 a week. He discharged me, and he says, "You're quitting tonight." So I went to the equity lawyer there, and he told me, he says, "Just report at the theater for the next 2 weeks, and then we'll take care of you." And I received my 2 weeks' salary, which made Mr. Ziegfeld very, very mad. If I'd meet him on the street, he wouldn't even notice me. Finally, in 26, I was playing in Chicago. I was invited to a tea out at Irene Castle's house. Someone tapped me on the shoulder and says, "Hello, Charlie." And here was Mr. Ziegfeld. He says, "I've got a great part for you, and I want you to play it. Captain Andy in Showboat." And that is the beginning of my association after 5 years again with Flo Ziegfeld, one of the grandest showmen that I have ever met in my life. Well, we opened on Christmas Eve in 1927 at the Ziegfeld Theater with Showboat, and we were a sensation. In 31, Flo called me up one day and he said, "Charlie," he says, "I want to revive the Showboat at the Carroll Theater." And that opening I shall never forget. It seemed as though it had never closed. And we played 25 or 30 weeks. And then, of course, the sad news was reported to us that our dear Flo Ziegfeld had passed on. God bless him. A great showman. And I will always respect his memory.
Many people thought Ziegfeld was making a big mistake in producing the stage adaptation of Edna Ferber's novel Showboat. Many things about the show proved he was right on opening night, but none more than the lovely song Helen Morgan sings for you now as she did then. P.G. Woodhouse and Jerome Kern's unforgettable Bill.
But along came Bill, who's not the type at all. You meet him on the street and never notice him. His form and face, his manly grace, is not the type that you would find in us at you. Oh, I can't explain, it's surely not his brain that makes me thrill. I love him because I don't know, because he's just my
In Showboat, Ziegfeld was credited with giving Negro performers their finest opportunity and greatest consideration up to that time. But this was nothing new to him, for 17 years earlier, in the Follies of 1910, his star was the immortal colored comic Bert Williams. Gene Buck returns now to our Stagestruck microphone to pay this tribute.
The great Bert Williams, in my humble estimation, was the greatest comedian that ever lived, black or white. His poker game was unforgettable, and he had that essence of humor, pathos.
In this performance of Bert Williams from the Follies of 1919, you hear the humor and the touch of pathos Mr. Buck spoke about. Here's Bert Williams on a very old record singing that corn mash madrigal, "The Moon Shines on the Moonshine."
How sad and still tonight by the old distillery, and how the cobwebs hop in the old machinery. But in the mountain top, far from the eyes of cops, oh, how the moon shines on the moonshine so merrily. How sad and still tonight by the old distillery, and how the moaners moan at the lager brewery. So, mister, if you please, don't let nobody sneeze up where the moon shines on the moonshine so stillily, so stillily.
Our story is only half told. But before we go on to the other stars and personalities who'll continue it, Gene Buck, the one man living who worked closer to Ziegfeld than any other, has this to say.
Few men had his taste and his innate sense of beauty, and he wanted the best of everything. He engaged Victor Herbert just to write a ballet. I was assistant producer with Ziggy throughout the years, and it was a period in American life when beauty meant more than it did today. I'd like to say what a privilege it has been for me to be associated with Flo Ziegfeld, and when the history of American theater is written, I don't know of any name in the field of musical comedy and revue that will stand out more than his, because he not alone brought showmanship and beauty and humor and harmony, but lasting memories that are very precious to all of us.
We'll return in a moment with the second half of Stagestruck and a further transcription of the exciting lives, times, and talents that tell the story of Florenz Ziegfeld, with Eddie Cantor, Billie Burke, Sophie Tucker, and Gene Buck, together with great performances from Gallagher and Shean, Jimmy Durante, Eddie Cantor, and Will Rogers.
Have you joined yet? The Red Cross in your community needs and welcomes your membership. If you haven't joined yet, why not walk into your local chapter and join? The United States plus the Red Cross plus you is a combination for security and preparedness that can't be beat. Have you joined yet? Answer the call. America listens most to the CBS Radio Network.
a full hour devoted to the transcribing of the magic world and people of the stage. Stagestruck is bringing you the story of Florenz Ziegfeld, the American girl's glorifier, the most fabulous producer of them all, with Eddie Cantor, Billie Burke, Sophie Tucker, and Gene Buck. And performances from such greats as Gallagher and Shean, Jimmy Durante, Eddie Cantor, and Will Rogers. And you'll hear the voice of the master showman himself, Florenz Ziegfeld. It's all about theater, the people who make it, the people who love it, the people who live it.
The world is the stage is the world of entertainment.
And now, here's your host, Mike Wallace. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Stagestruck. That song has become the signature of a man born 85 years ago today. A man destined to breathe new life into Broadway and the entertainment world, who in the quarter century given him was to reign supreme in the field of musical comedy and revue. His showgirls and comics, composers and dancers, gag writers and singers are almost without number. For starting way back in 1907 until his death in 1932, Florenz Ziegfeld produced 21 mammoth follies. Cabaret shows on the roof of the Amsterdam Theater, such as his 9 o'clock revues and midnight frolics, and other Broadway hits including Rio Rita, Sally, Rosalie, Sonny, Hotcha, Whoopee, and Showboat. In 1932, shortly before his imminent death, Ziegfeld turned to a new medium, radio, producing a series of shows over the Columbia Broadcasting System. Here he is now, with Eddie Dowling, on a recording of a broadcast of 22 years ago.
This is my first appearance before a first-night audience of one of my shows. For more than 40 years that I've spent in the theater, I've let my boys and girls do the talking. But I couldn't resist the opportunity to speak to you, because I wish to thank you for what I trust is your gracious acceptance of the first of the Ziegfeld radio shows.
Tell us, Flo, as you look back on all your shows, who do you consider was your greatest star?
I guess my favorite star at any time you ask me is the star of my latest show.
While the show was being broadcast, Ziegfeld received many congratulatory telegrams, and he spoke of the senders and of one other.
That's fine, all of those friends of mine, but there's only one person in the world I can depend on to tell me the truth. And she's really responsible for keeping sophistication out of my shows, and that's my wife, Billie Burke.
Billie Burke is continuing her career as one of our most popular and charming actresses. We went to Palm Beach down in Florida to talk with her about the man who so depended upon her, the man she met so long ago.
Miss Burke, do you remember how you first met Flo Ziegfeld?
I was trying to remember the other day how long ago it was. 40 years ago. Oh, my goodness. Doesn't seem possible. Well, it was a New Year's Eve party for Somerset Maugham, and as we came into the Astor ballroom, I saw a Machiavellian kind of man standing at the foot of the stairs, and then I suddenly found this good-looking man to dance with. He was a most divine dancer, and I thought he was an Italian. I thought maybe he belonged to an embassy or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And he was very sunburned, very dark. And then I heard someone say, "Oh, Flo, I thought you'd gone home." I thought, Flo, my goodness, there's only one person they call Flo. This must be Florenz Ziegfeld. Well, by that time, I think I'd already fallen in love with him.
He was such a fabulous showman. Was the courtship as fabulous?
Yes, it was rather breathtaking. My management, the Frohman office, didn't want me to marry. I was doing good plays, and I think they had very high hopes for me. And when they heard that I was fussing around with Mr. Ziegfeld, they were horrified, and they did everything to stop it. So we used to meet in Grant's Tomb and places like that, so no one would find me. We were married 3 months after we married.
Was it a big wedding?
Well, I don't know whether you'd call going to Hoboken to be married a big wedding or not. The poor little minister was a little baffled. He thought Billy was Mr. Ziegfeld and Flo was me.
Tell me this, Miss Burke. How did Mr. Ziegfeld get his trademark as the glorifier of the American girl?
I remember one morning at breakfast, he was highly elated at the using the word glorified and glorifying.
He thought that was grand, something that he discovered. I don't think he knew how long it had been used.
Was Mr. Ziegfeld always a wealthy man? He was such a lavish spender.
He was not wealthy when I met him. Not at all. He'd been doing follies and didn't have much money. I didn't think about that at all. And I don't know. I'm sure he didn't think about it with me. I was successful, I must say. I hadn't thought of that. Why did you bring that up?
Well, because there's a story, you see, that he sent you a rose one time with 2 $100 bills wrapped around it.
Yes, it was a rose I had raised, too, in my own garden. But he had wrapped 2 nice, crisp $100 bills around it. And he said, baby, I'm sorry, that's all the money I've got. Which is extra sweet.
Well, since he's always been surrounded by so much glamour, so much excitement, it's kind of hard to imagine him ever pausing to take a rest, to go home, did he?
He loved his home. He loved friends. He loved entertaining. And I think that's why I gave up my work, more or less. I found that his home was awfully necessary to him after these big jamborees he'd have and getting shows together. It was a great deal of work. He loved good food. He was an epicure from the word go. I got nice cooks for him. His little mother was more disappointed that she gave me her cookbook and said, Billy, dear, all the things Flo loved. And I said, oh, Mummy, dear, I'll do my best, but I can't do it myself.
It was getting late, and we had to leave Miss Burke. We thanked her for helping us in this tribute to her late, great husband, and she matched our thanks most graciously.
I think it's all so wonderful that this has happened today. I'm very happy about it. Goodbye.
Flo Ziegfeld was indispensable to the musical development of Broadway. His innovations, his standards, forced others to keep pace. But there was another indispensable man around, particularly in the musical Showgirl, produced by Ziegfeld in 1929. And the indispensable man let the audience know all about it as only he can. Here he is now, from way back in 29, Jimmy Durante, and his modest question, can Broadway do without me?
Say, Jimmy, you look worried. There's something on your mind. I wonder what it is.
Yeah, I just had an argument with Ziegfeld.
Ziegfeld?
Corner Broadway and 43rd.
Some corner?
You know, Ziegfeld said, do you know who I am? I said, do you know who I am?
What happened?
He said, who I am?
Yeah.
I said nothing. I was cornered.
Cornered? Some
But
corner?
it makes no difference what I start out to say.
Why not, Jim?
Why, this is what I wish to convey.
What is it, Jimmy?
Now, you know darn well I can do without Broadway.
But
can Broadway do without me?
No.
Why, Herald Square, Times Square, Columbus Circle, 96. Say, where am I? I must have passed my station.
Why, he's lost.
They must have found out at Times Square that I passed my destination.
Why?
They sent messengers all over to get me to head a celebration.
I get it.
You know, as I got off the express, some yokel pushes me into a local.
What happened?
The crowd, seeing a mistake, pulled the emergency brake and shouted,
Why, there's Jimmy, that well-dressed man.
So you know darn well I can do without Broadway. But can Broadway do without me?
No.
Hey,
Can Broadway do without me?
Broadway can't do without its Durantes any more than a man as dizzily busy as Ziegfeld could do without a secretary. They say that a secretary knows the boss better than anybody else and has fewer illusions. Catherine Dix was Ziegfeld's last secretary, and she joined him
in 1916 at the Century Theater when he and Mr. Dillingham were producing The Century Girl.
And then you stayed with him until his
And
death.
I remained with him until he passed away.
What kind of a fellow was he to work for?
Well, Mr. Ziegfeld was a very quiet, easygoing person and very easy to get along with. The only difficulty I had with him was that he made about 40 appointments for each afternoon. So I had the job of sort of picking the wheat from the chaff and putting it through in the way that I thought he'd best receive it anyway.
Mr. Ziegfeld, I'm told, was an animal fancier, both live and porcelain.
Oh, yes, indeed. They had a fabulous zoo at Hastings on the Hudson, Berkeley Crest, their home.
You mean a live zoo?
Oh, yes.
And then he kept a miniature collection, particularly of elephants.
Oh, yes, of
on his
elephants.
desk in the
We
office.
had in the office a long table there, and there must have been 300 elephants of all types of porcelains. He is particularly superstitious about his elephants because he always demanded that their trunks be raised and that they be facing the door as people enter.
Now, money, we've learned, was no object to
No,
him.
money meant nothing, only to be spent. That was the principal thing. Keep it in circulation.
Where did he get it, and on what did he spend it?
Well, through his plays and his follies and the midnight frolics. And
Did he have his own
his-
backers, or did he raise the money himself?
He did not have any backers. He would spend it on most anything, from something in the dime store to something in Cartier's that was simply fabulous.
Did you ever complain to him and say, Mr. Ziegfeld, you're going to wind up a poor man if you don't
Oh,
stop
at one time I did, and he said, "You talk just like my wife."
I've heard stories that he would be sitting in the theater and be displeased with somebody up on stage, and instead of speaking directly to the person on stage, he'd send a wire?
Well, if something in the theater just didn't strike him right, that person would directly afterwards get a telegram, probably anywhere from 50 to 200 words, telling just exactly what he had on his mind.
Was he a difficult man for you to
No,
fathom?
he was not difficult. The only thing about Mr. Ziegfeld that I can say is that he had a very nice personality and a wonderful kindness in his heart for everyone. And I only wish that the entire world could know what he did in his lifetime for the girls who were fortunate enough to have worked for him.
Catherine Dix, thank you very, very much.
Showgirls always formed the backbone of the Ziegfeld Follies. Beautiful girls, such as Gilda Gray, who made her radiant debut in the Follies of 1922. But good as she was, Gilda wasn't the hit of that Follies. No, it was a team and a song that so captured the fancy of audiences that this Follies became the only one to run 2 seasons. A team and a song that made such an impression that right now, 32 years later, they're still being parodied. The team, Gallagher and Shean. The song, sung as they did in the Follies of 1922, Mr. Gallagher and Mister Shean.
Oh, Mr. Gallagher. Well, Mr. Gallagher. Yes, I'm here. What do you call that game they play upon the link? Red and six that drive a ball, the man you can't find it at all. Then a caddy walk around and think and think. Why, I'm surprised, Mr. Shean. Mr. Shean, you don't even know a hazard from a dream. It has become a popular game, and you don't even know its name. Oh, no, Mr. Gallagher. No, long tennis, Mr. Shean. Oh, Mr. Gallagher. Yes, hello. Mr. Gallagher. Well, when you sail home, you'll get a great surprise. I will. When your ship is drawing near, it will make you shed a tear to see the light of New York shining in the sky. You're right, Mr. Shean. Mr. Shean. I have made that trip, so I know just what you mean. But there's one light that shines so bright. It's the brightest light in sight. And you have liberty, Mr. Gallagher. Coney Island, Mr. Shean.
Over the years, the call boards backstage at each Follies have listed the names of almost all the greats of show business. One of the most durable performers of all is the last, but never the least, of the red-hot mamas, Sophie Tucker.
Sophie, how did you get into your first Follies?
I was playing in a burlesque show called The Gay Masqueraders in Holyoke, Massachusetts. And I was getting $50 a week when Mr. Mark Claw, Mr. Ziegfeld's talent scout, picked me out of the cast.
Well, who were some of the people in that Follies with you?
There was Nora Bayes, Jack Norworth, Eva Tangway, Harry Kelly, and many other fine sterling performers.
It must have meant a tremendous amount to you to get into a Follies.
Appearing in the Follies meant a long run of 40 to 50 weeks in New York. no traveling expenses, and terrific prestige for other jobs to follow.
How well did you know Flo Ziegfeld?
You know, I never spoke to Mr. Ziegfeld after I was introduced to him at the first rehearsal until I was let out. 20 years later, I met him in the street, and he approached me with, "I wish I could afford to put you in one of my follies today," as I already had started making 4- and 5-figure salaries in the nightclubs.
Sophie, what was your big number in the Follies?
There were 2 song hits I had in the Follies. One was the production number called "It's Moving Day Way Down in Jungletown," and my personal song hit that Harry Von Tilzer wrote for me called "The Cubanola Glide."
Sophie, just one more question. Where did you get the name The Last of the Red Hot Mamas?
In 1925, Jack Yellen, my ace songwriter, gave me a song called "I'm the Last of the Red Hot Mamas," and the title has stuck to me ever since.
Thanks very much.
Thank you so much for calling on me to add my little bit to your program.
There were 4 men closer to Ziegfeld than any others. Gene Buck, his lyric writer and assistant producer. Will Rogers, the immortal comic whose voice you'll hear in a moment. And Joseph Urban, the great Austrian architect and designer who culminated years of design for Ziegfeld with the Ziegfeld Theater at 54th Street and 6th Avenue here in New York. And the little kid from the Lower East Side who fought his way up to the entertainment top and who Ziegfeld regarded as his son, Eddie Cantor. Eddie's out in Palm Springs, California now, surrounded by his writers, working on his forthcoming Colgate Comedy Hour TV show. But he set his present-day show aside to remember about some of those past.
It was really my lucky day, back in 1916, when I first met the great Ziegfeld. I was playing in a show in Los Angeles, a show called Canary Cottage, and I was doing quite well. Mr. Ziegfeld heard about it and sent for me. The next thing I knew, I was playing atop of the New Amsterdam Theater, a thing called the Midnight Frolics. It was the most expensive cabaret in all of America. It cost $5 to sit down. Oh, you couldn't afford to get up. And the stars that he had in his cabaret, well, you just couldn't pay for them these days. We had Will Rogers, W.C. Fields, Fanny Bryce, Bert Williams, and the showgirls. Many of the showgirls became stars later on in Hollywood. After working for Mr. Ziegfeld on the roof, the next thing I knew, I was playing downstairs in the Follies of 1917. It was fun working for Ziegfeld. He had an unfailing eye for beauty. He had good taste. He knew music. And he was smart enough to leave his comedians alone. He figured with men like Will Rogers and W.C. Fields and Bert Williams, and with girls like Fanny Bryce, that they knew how to please his customers. They knew how to get laughs. And he left them alone. I'd like to tell, if I may, this one incident or anecdote that would explain more than volumes can tell of his extravagance. It was the year 1929. Early that year, Mr. Ziegfeld and I were both being massaged in a health place on 42nd Street. On 2 separate tables. It's much more comfortable that way. Ziegfeld turned to me and said, "Eddie, you're a very lucky man. You have a nice family. You have some money. You're in the biggest hit in New York, and you're working for the greatest producer in the world." And I agreed with all of this. And he said, "Yes, you've got everything." And I kidded him. Oh, I said, "No, I haven't got everything." He said, "Like what? What haven't you got?" I said, "Well, Flo, I can recall when I first went to work for you in 1916, I'd watch the patrons driving up to the New Amsterdam Theater to go up on the roof. I watched them driving up in their Rolls Royces, and I said, if I could ever have a Rolls Royce." He said, "Why, you can get one. They're not too expensive." I said, "Me? I wouldn't dare. Me in the Rolls Royce?" Why, the fellows on the east side would come around and throw rocks through my windshield. As we say in the movies, fade out, fade in. Saturday, during the matinee, Ziegfeld scribbled a note to me, asking me if I wouldn't have dinner with him. Every now and then we'd go down to 46th Street to Dinty Moors. The matinee was over. I met him in the lobby of the theater, and we walked out to the street. And there, standing in front of the theater, so help me, a brand new Rolls Royce with an orchid and a card which read, "Now you've got everything, love, Flo." This was Ziegfeld. There'll never be another.
Eddie said that he'd never forget Whoopee, the show Mr. Ziegfeld starred him in back in 1928 at the New Amsterdam Theater, that it was one of the great joys of his life. And one of the great joys of that show was Eddie prancing around the stage, rolling those eyes, as he sang Makin Whoopee.
Another year, or maybe less. What's this I hear? Well, can't you guess? She feels neglected, and he's suspected of making whoopee. She sits alone most every night. He doesn't phone or even write. He says he's busy, but she says, is he? He's making whoopee. He doesn't make much money, $5,000 per. Some judge who thinks he's funny says you pay 6 to her. He says, now judge, suppose I fail. The judge says, Bud, right into jail. You'd better keep her. You'll find it's cheaper than making whoopee.
Ziegfeld stars came from everywhere. New York's Lower East Side, as in the case of Eddie Cantor, or Claremore, Oklahoma, whence came, drawl, chewing gum, lariat, and all, the most beloved performer in the history of American show business, Will Rogers. Will Rogers' most famous lead line was, "All I know is what I read in the papers." And here he tells you about it, as he did in so many follies, on a record made more precious by his passing.
Now, folks, all I know is just what little news I read every day in the papers. I see where another wife out on Long Island near New York just shot her husband. Season opened a month earlier this year. Prohibition caused all this. There's just as many husbands shot at in the old days, but women were missing them. Prohibitions improved their marksmanship 90%. Never a day passes in New York without some innocent bystander being shot. You just stand around this town long enough and be innocent, and somebody's going to shoot you. One day there was 4 shots. That's the best shooting ever done in this town. It's hard to find 4 innocent people in New York, even if you don't stop to shoot them. That's why a policeman never has to aim here. He just shoots up the street anywhere. No matter who he hits, it's the right one. Robberies. Did you ever read about so many robbers? I see where some of our cities and towns are talking about being more strict with these robbers. When they catch them from now on, they're going to publish their names. They've been having every kind of a week here in New York. Smile week, and apple week, and one called Don't Get Hurt week. Taxi cab drivers couldn't hardly wait till the following Monday to run over you. Everybody's talking about what's the matter with this country and what the country needs. What this country needs worse than anything else is a place to park your car. What our big cities need is another orange in these orangeade stands. See where a New York society woman is suing her ex-husband again, claims she can't properly support that child on $50,000 a year alimony. Somebody's been feeding that young one meat. I'm off Ireland for home rule from now on. I read an Irish paper the other day and it says liquor is 18 cents a quart. Can you imagine a nation wanting more freedom than that? See where the Ku Klux is coming into New York? Yes, they're here. I'm no fool. You ain't gonna get me telling no jokes about them.
Of all the stars that shined in the sky that Flo Ziegfeld pulled down and draped over an enchanted Broadway, his greatest favorite was Will Rogers. And so Will Rogers will bring our story to an end. Earlier, you heard the voice of Ziegfeld from his old CBS broadcast back in 1932. Will Rogers was also on that show. At the time, Ziegfeld was a very sick man, a few short months from death. Only his wife, Billie Burke, listening in California, and Will Rogers, his dearest friend, knew how sick. As Will said,
I just come down here to pay my respects to Mr. Florenz Ziegfeld. Had there been no Ziegfeld and no Follies, I would today have been 12 miles north of Clarendon, Oklahoma, plowing for corn, slopping the hogs, running my own still, and knocking the Republican Party. As that is considered one of the chores in my country. Since become universal. You know, Mr. Ziegfeld, he picks out the most beautiful. He sent, from every corner of the world. He gets sent there to Oklahoma to get me. The critics raved over me when I first went into New York. Said they never had seen such features. Said I was different. Ziegfeld, Flo, you not only glorified the American girl, but you put enough clothes on her to make people want to see her. Mr. Ziegfeld has produced the most wonderful shows year after year of any producer the theater has ever had. Every man that flies the ocean from now on will always be just an imitation of Lindbergh. And every musical show that's produced is just an imitation of Ziegfeld. Flo, I hear you've been sick. Don't die. We need you.
And that brings us to the end of our show. Be with us next week when Stagestruck presents an all-musical show. The best music, past and present, of such wonderful composers as Cole Porter, Sigmund Romberg, and Arthur Schwartz. Brought to you by Alfredo Antonini and the CBS Chorus and Orchestra, and Earl Wrightson, Lois Hunt, and Louise Carlisle. For now then, this is Mike Wallace saying goodnight. May you all become as stage-struck as Howard G. Barnes, our producer, Bob Corcoran, our writer, our directors Bruno Zerotto Jr. and John Dietz, and Lucian Davis, our energetic West Coast representative, and all the rest of us who put together and transcribed this show for you.
Fun comes thick, fast, and easy to take tonight on CBS Radio's Jack Benny Show. Jack's director descends on the household to get some work done on Jack's next show, and the whole gang soon gets embroiled in the comedy. Everything stops but the laughs when it's Jack's Benny time, tonight on CBS Radio. America listens most to the CBS Radio Network.